The first video already discussed the main motivation behind the NOMAD Encyclopedia and the key functionalities that it offers. In this video, I'm going to discuss the material identification process in more detail and expand on the opportunities and challenges of this process. As mentioned in the introductory video, the material identification process starts by assigning material IDs for each particular calculation. Let's consider the route that is taken by a single upload all the way up to becoming visible in the NOMAD Encyclopedia, together with all the other results for that material. We will start out with a computational result for sodium chloride in a rock salt structure that is uploaded into the NOMAD repository. Once the upload is finished, the contents are parsed and individual calculations are detected. From each calculation, a representative structure is selected containing the atomic positions, chemical species, unit cell, and periodic boundary conditions. This is all we need to proceed to the first step in the identification, which is to determine the dimensionality of the structure. We separate the structures into 4 different dimensionalities. Zero-dimensional materials, which include atoms, molecules, and clusters. One-dimensional structures, which include materials such as polymers, nanotubes, and nanoribbons. Two-dimensional structures, which often are surfaces or purely two-dimensional materials such as graphene. And three-dimensional materials such as bulk crystals or amorphous materials. This seemingly easy task of detecting the system dimensionality is complicated by the fact that the true periodicity of the system is not directly available in the code output. It is fairly typical to model a system with fully periodic boundary conditions while effectively lowering the dimensionality by introducing vacuum gaps. In order to reliably detect the dimensionality, we investigate how the number of isolated clusters grows as the system is repeated in the periodic cell dimensions. How the number of these clusters scales directly indicates the actual dimensionality. This method takes into account the vacuum gaps and works for any orientation of the original system. In the example we are considering, the calculation gets tagged as 3-dimensional by this procedure. Having this dimensionality information available is already very helpful for making targeted searches. Imagine having to look for graphene without this dimensionality information. The typical search criteria found in materials databases, such as the involved chemical species or the number of atoms, are not really enough to narrow down the search for many of these interesting structures. But we want to do even better by assigning material IDs that are based on the atomic positions. We use 2 complementary approaches for this. Let's first consider the symmetry-based method that would be applied for our example. The symmetry-based method is used for assigning material IDs for bulk and 2D structures, as they typically can be well described through the symmetries that they possess. The detection starts by identifying the symmetry properties of the structure, namely the space group and together with it the crystal family of the structure. For each crystal family, there exists a conventional cell, the one you typically see in the textbooks, and we apply an algorithm that converts all other possible cells to the conventional one. The atoms within the conventional cell can also be assigned special high symmetry positions called Wyckoff positions. These positions are indicated by single lower or uppercase letters, and they provide a convenient way to encode the positions within the cell. In some cases, the same material can also be represented with several alternative Wyckoff positions. The possible options can, however, be enumerated, and by applying simple selection rules, a standardized Wyckoff position can be selected. In the case of our sodium chloride structure, this normalization step swaps the Wyckoff positions of the sodium and chlorine atoms, resulting in the final standardized Wyckoff positions for this material. The combination of detecting the space group using a conventional cell and selecting the standardized Wyckoff positions gives us a normalized, discretized representation of the material. This information can be then fed into a hash function, which turns it into a fixed size material ID. This detection works for high symmetry structures and is invariant to the used cell volume, the choice of the unit cell shape, the choice of the unit cell lattice vector directions, the specific occupation of the Wyckoff sites, and also to small deviations from the exact symmetry. An additional benefit is that we automatically obtain a representative structure which can be shown in the overview page for each material. Through this last step, our sodium chloride example gets assigned a material ID, and the calculation is ready to be included as a part of the respective materials page in the encyclopedia. Now other users are able to perform a fairly simple search that identifies the wanted material, and they are able to find our results. The symmetry-based material identification method can only provide meaningful grouping for highly symmetric structures. In order to support lower symmetry structures, we use an alternative method based on structural fingerprints, also known as descriptors. At their core, these descriptors are numerical vectors which aim to capture the main structural features of an atomistic system. The output of these descriptors is designed so that it's not affected by rotations, translations, or differences in which order the atoms are indexed in. This makes them powerful tools in analyzing the similarity of materials. This descriptor-based material identification starts from the detailed atomistic structure. The structure is transformed into a fixed size numerical descriptor that now encodes the main structural features. There exist several options on how to perform this transformation, and in our case we use a relatively simple descriptor based on the Coulomb matrix, as it is very quick to calculate and provides enough resolution for this task. By additionally discretizing the descriptor output space with a multi-grid method, we arrive at a stable numerical representation that can be fed through a hash function to create a material ID for the encyclopedia. Through the discretization of the descriptor output space, we can bypass the expensive pairwise similarity analysis, which would otherwise impact our ability to scale the identification into large amounts of structures. The descriptor-based material identification method can be used for any type of system, irrespective of the present symmetries. Currently, we use it for identifying one-dimensional materials, as they cannot be meaningfully grouped by the symmetry-based material identification method. Before concluding this video, I want to discuss some of the opportunities and the associated challenges regarding the future development of the encyclopedia. Currently, 3 materials classes are supported: 3-dimensional materials, 2-dimensional materials, and 1-dimensional materials. As we develop the encyclopedia further, we want to add support for other materials classes, such as molecules and more complex multi-component systems that consist of several different materials. One of the challenges in expanding to other materials classes is in determining when materials are different enough to be considered separate. For example, are conformers of the same molecule still the same material? And what sort of balance should we aim between false positives and false negatives in the detection of materials? In order to support multi-component systems, we would need accurate methods for identifying the different components. For example, it is a non-trivial task to automate the identification of a molecule that is adsorbed on top of a surface, or to automatically identify defects within a bulk structure. Another major opportunity that the encyclopedia brings is the possibility to combine data from multiple sources by linking information using the material IDs. For example, we already use the symmetry-based material identification to incorporate prototype labels from the AFLOW prototype library directly into the encyclopedia. This paves way towards interoperability and mixing of materials data from several sources. In order to achieve this kind of linking, we would need to establish global and more stable material identifiers that could be used across the materials science community. The NOMAD Encyclopedia currently only contains data from computational sources. Integrating experimental data to the encyclopedia would allow us to build a more comprehensive materials information resource and allow easier comparison and validation of both computational and experimental results. One problem in this is that whereas computational data typically always contains the full structural information at the level of individual atoms, the experimental data often cannot be resolved at this level of detail. This makes it difficult to automatically link these two data sources together. The next tutorial videos will show you how to use the graphical user interface for browsing materials information and how to use the Encyclopedia API for programmatically mining materials knowledge. Thank you for watching.